a decade explicitly recruiting analysts and investment managers and portfolio managers and numerical development managers and all sorts into roles, and regularly come across how vital the modeling component is. And it really doesn't disappear as you get more senior. It becomes, if not more important. And I think doing this webinar in 2025, when the market is so exceptionally tough and there are so many applicants for each role, just heightens the importance of getting it right when you're upskilling yourself. So I don't think there's been a more important time to deliver this kind of message than now. And if you're viewing this and potentially looking at jobs, I really hope it can help you learn ways of upskilling, learn why to upskill, and then towards the end, learn a few techniques that can really help you in modeling scenarios, which for the most part, you go into a job process, you have a nice first stage on Teams or something, but very quickly, to tell you apart from the competition, you're put in either a virtual or physical room, and you've got to produce a 2 to 3 hour cash flow to get to that third or fourth stage. And that's where, anecdotally, the numbers of applicants I have are cut in half or more. And I really want to help the people viewing this today navigate that part, because it is exceptionally tough. And I hope I have the right intel for you guys. As Sonia says, any questions, you can either wait till the end and we'll do it, or I'll keep or maybe Sonia, you can keep your eye on the box if anyone asks a question on something specific I'm saying, which I really encourage you to do. I don't mind stopping if a great question comes up after a slide's finished, but do it however you want. And yeah, with that in mind, I'm happy to crack on. Okay, great. So bit of an overall intro on this. Let me just skip to that first slide. Before I go into how to upskill, I think it's worth a step back in terms of why it's meaningful and worth doing, and why I think it's a good use of your precious energy, and in many cases money as well, because a lot of these courses and a lot of these certifications cost money. I think what I've noticed is a lot of candidates come into the real estate market, whether they're undergraduate surveyors from like a Reading or a Brooks, or even master's graduates that can be from like a Henley or a Bayes Business School. And although they have all of the right foundational knowledge, one thing that really shocks them is how little, even with the right intentions, the educational sector prepares them for how demanding employers are when it comes to modeling. This is right off the bat. This can be within 3 to 6 months of finishing university. They've done a few internships, now going for permanent roles. And right away, they're up against candidates with a 1.5 years experience or more because the market's so challenging. And they're thrust into these positions where they need to do like complex IRR, levered and unlevered modeling, promote structures. And I just don't feel, for the most part, that the educational system mirrors that intensity and really sets them up. So I think that's point one. Point two, I think even when candidates do find employment and they're in an analytical role, one unfortunate phenomenon is that when you're in a role, even that doesn't prepare you well for how modeling tests are conducted at interview. Often the pace is much slower. You have a lot longer to develop a cash flow. In the real world, you might use wider tools like Argus, where it's more data inputting led rather than a flexible Excel cash flow. And so even doing what you think would be the perfect thing to do and having a job and regularly modeling, I'm finding it doesn't really set candidates up well enough unless they're in a really intense atmosphere already. And then we have what I've already telegraphed here as the imbalance we have right now. We have on one hand hundreds of applicants at times for my analyst roles overnight, and that's no exaggeration. We have clients that mean well, but need to find a way to drill down many, many applicants, all of which have great academics, first-class honors, distinctions, come from multiple languages. They need to find some kind of alchemy to get that down to one individual by the end, or maybe two in a good role. And they frankly need to use as intense a case study as they can within only a couple of hours, so candidates have the time to do it, to drill them out. And so there's never been a greater asymmetry between client expectations and what candidates are actually ready to produce without the right training in the background. So you have to, in other words, really bring your A game from the start to have a fighting chance. I don't want to worry anyone, but you know, there's some elite people out there. Often the ones that do best in modeling tests are the ones that have either done specific courses which are purely on modeling, or they've done a few interviews where they've been second or third, but they've just gotten more and more used to what a modeling test looks like. So it's really more the experience of going through a recruitment process than the academics that I find are preparing people. So that's kind of what I'm trying to articulate here. Um, I'm assuming no questions yet, Sonia, so I'll go to the next slide. Perfect. Okay. Why is this then? Why has Excel become so prominent, not only in the typical analyst roles, but even in disciplines which have historically been more development management or asset management or fund management, where traditionally a surveyor from the University of Reading or University of Brooks would come and do this, right? Well, why is it? Well, I think it's because there is a much more turbulent economic backdrop when it comes to transactions nowadays. There's far fewer transactions happening. Investors need to be really tightly persuaded to part with their capital for a particular deal and make sure the IRR makes sense for them. All of this means that even if you're a traditional surveyor, let alone an analyst, you have to be incredibly switched on in how numerate you are. And you have to be able to kind of go to those investors with the right underpinnings of the deal, a really comprehensive investment memo, and explain why they should part with their precious money for this particular property rather than another property or another sector within finance, because they could do stocks and shares whatever they want right now. Um, and I think this all stems from the GFC, the Great Financial Crisis, and I think it was the backdrop against which I joined Cobalt in 2014. I never had that kind of understanding when I joined that surveyors could just kind of rock up and speak well and get a deal done. Like, it was always understanding that you had to model incredibly well from the beginning, from 2014 when I started to now. But I've seen it gradually become more and more vital with time. We had Brexit, that worried everyone. We had COVID, this worried everyone. We had the trustonomic situation, the peak of interest rates, the cost of living. We're kind of still in the aftermath of that now. Each one of these macro events has condensed the job market and made modeling even more important to employers to convince investors to part with money and to get assets bought. Um, this means, as I say in my final bullet point here, that even across roles which traditionally are not modeling focused, Excel skills are really important. So if you're listening to this and you're not a typical analyst, I still think there might be something of importance to you here. And to touch on point 3 in this slide, another factor I think that's coming into this is the increase in repositioning and development in the market. Many assets are perceived to be in need of modernization in some way, whether it's social or urban redevelopment or transformation projects. A lot of assets are seen as needing to go through that to be viable in the modern context. That, of course, is incredibly analytical demanding, because if you're going to spend 5 years transforming a town centre and incorporating residential or all sorts of things, you need a very robust model, and you need your analysts to really know how to do that and work with the development managers closely. And so I think that's another side thing that bleeds into what I'm saying here, is that all of this makes modeling important, whether it's the broader macroeconomic status or the modernization of assets become more ESG or socially impactful. It all requires modeling. It all goes into this mixing bowl that makes financial analysis so important. Okay. So I've gone into this kind of at the start, but I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware that the difference in giving this webinar last year in 2024, where things were admittedly quite tough, to giving it now, where I think actually things have only become in many ways harder, is that it's really a reflection of the job market here. Clients, I don't think, are inherently evil in putting you into a room for 2 hours and making you model under pressure. They are just trying to get that applicant list down, and they're trying to use every resource they can to tell brilliant people apart from one another. The more intense the model, the more that achieves. and that is exactly why if you are only getting invited to kind of 10% of what you apply for, which isn't an uncommon ratio, there's so many challenging roles out there, then for that 10%, you have to have all of your toolkit ready to model as well as you possibly can. And I think if I'm reflecting on what I look at when I am posting an advert for a role, and I'm going through a list of CVs and trying to work out how I can tell candidates apart. If you want a bit of advice from me, I think you want to make clear in the CV itself the different financial modeling courses you've done. So if you've done Dayfield, for example, brilliant, like put it in there, make it clear what kind of week duration course it was. Was it 4 weeks, 8 weeks? Was it the 12-week kind of mega course? Or if it was another one of those courses, just I would really encourage you to put that at the top of anything else, So that's point one. I feel very assured when I see a candidate that's done clear financial training because I know that that goes beyond academics and allows them to know what a financial test looks like. Secondly, I think if you've done a module in your master's, which was very financial modeling intensive, say it was a particular module on repositioning of an asset, you had to do like a thesis on underwriting this particular building and do like a full memo and present to your professor like they were an investor. I would really make that extra clear in your CV as well. Like list the modules, make your grade very clear for that particular one and touch on how much it improved, how much it kind of challenged your modeling and improved it. A third thing I've seen more recently, which I think can be very useful in certain instances, is if you have a model you're really proud of. For example, it was the outcome of your master's. It was like in your thesis, you had to do a full discounted cash flow. Perhaps you've done it more recently during an internship and you were involved for 8 weeks producing this really high level model. Um, I would encourage you guys to have that as an addendum to your CV so you can show the client immediately like how high caliber the work you produce is. And if that makes you uncomfortable having it as part of your CV, because then it becomes a much larger document, have it as some kind of 1 or 2 pager you can share when you feel it's right with your recruiter or with the client to say, hey, look, here's my profile. I hope it speaks for itself. But just in case, here's a specific model I've done recently that I think really highlights my strengths in this area. Finally, on this point, and what I've seen recently in analyst roles is candidates bringing some kind of laptop or tablet with them to the interview. You then read the room and make sure it feels appropriate. But if the client is asking very specific modeling questions, it's a great look to say, hey, yeah, so I do this, that, and this. But what might also help if I just kind of quickly show you something I did very recently for this office development in Mayfair. I kind of whipped up a model based on changing use and incorporating more retail, X, Y, Z, and then you can walk them through how you did it. I've seen that be an incredibly good look in some of my roles because it's just the extra mile in showing your competency. And these are all ways with the market being challenging that I think you guys can hopefully promote yourselves better than a single 1 or 2 page CV. And I hope that is useful to pass on. I'll continue if there's no questions. This is just an extension of my last slide, but I do think there's a final point on there I just want to mention, and it's perhaps the best and biggest hack I could possibly mention. If you're in a peer group of people that qualified or passed their masters with you, and one of your friends or a couple of your friends have been fortunate enough to secure a role, really use them for information. Say, hey, look, can you give me like an anonymized version of the model that you completed so I can practice on it? What did you find worked really well for you? I think your friend who perhaps has been looking longer may share that actually once you've done a few of these, they're all variations of a very similar task. They're nearly always an opening tab with an asset on there, a set of instructions. It tells you to have a levered and unlevered IRR, gives you like a term that the asset will be held within, tells you any construction costs, and then on the following kind of couple of tabs, you devise a model from scratch to do like a cash on cash, maybe a promote structure if it's a very challenging kind of model. They all begin to have the same kind of appearance. And I would just encourage you to ask your friend, like, what worked well for you? What prep did you do? Did you bring a physical calculator? Did you use your phone? um, can I please see some anonymized examples of what the test looked like? Because it still might be in their inbox, if they were sent it to complete the task, they can just strip the company information and then send you like a bit of an example. And then just practice, practice, practice. Because despite all of the advice in this presentation, when I work with a candidate, I almost price in the fact that for the first couple of job opportunities, they're just getting used to the way things are. And then on the third or fourth one, they really get comfortable and they nail it. Now, the challenge is because the roles aren't so plentiful right now, 3 or 4 jobs for them to apply to could easily be a couple of months, especially in the summer. I mean, that could be the whole summer. So you want to get a head start and use your friends and peer group to give you a bit of a steer before your third or fourth attempt. So I hope that is useful. So passing a modeling test. So here's my overall advice on this. So this is with the assumption that you've done all of the grounding available to you, right? So you probably have some kind of educational background, whether it's an undergrad or a master's, where you've done some form of modeling in your day-to-day studies, and or you're now in a full-time or internship position where you're using a combination of Excel and Argus each day. So you have that foundational skill set. Hopefully, on top of that, you've used some kind of course to make your skills more robust and apply them in a context that's more test-like. And I'm sure Sonia and her courses are very good at recreating more of that real life example of what employers are actually looking for. So let's assume you've done all this. What are some helpful things you can do to actually pass the test? Well, here's a few things that have worked really well for my candidates in the past. I would always recommend a physical calculator above just your mobile phone. Okay. I would always encourage you to recreate the dual screen setup in your office at home and not suddenly use a different laptop or go from a Word or sorry, a Windows to an Apple Mac overnight. Okay. I'll do little things like make sure you've already had your bathroom breaks and are not loading up on Monster Energy drink like half an hour before, because honestly, every single minute counts. Okay. But paradoxically, I'd also have some planned breaks in the 3 hours where you know you're going to give yourself a few minutes not modeling or thinking about it, because I see so often it's fatigue or it's missing a crucial kind of inflation flag or lease term that really catches candidates out. And I think it comes from rushing. Fourth point, I would make sure you don't bite off more than you can chew. I see this overwhelmingly often. Often the modeling test is very open in what it asks for. It might say levered and unlevered IRR, some kind of cash on cash kind of profit thing. And there's a temptation, especially if you're really competent, to try and create this all singing, all dancing model, but you really shouldn't. You should actually aim to do perhaps less than you think you can, but do it really well. Formatting is just as valuable as the content. If something is done on like tab 2 for Excel and you've got every single result on that single tab, so it's just a splash page of graphs and tables and there's no inherent logic to it, I find that to be a really bad look. You need to make sure you're acute to your formatting, that you use the tabs well, that the tabs are clearly labeled, and that basically you give yourself mini breaks to re-steer and make sure you're on track with that philosophy. And just as importantly, a break near the end to have that final read through. Often a modeling test is sent as like, look, this modeling test is 2.5 hours, send it back to us by 10:30. Don't at 10:30 finish your work and send it, right? I know it's already tight in terms of time frame, but really price in 10:20 being that final time and use those final 10 minutes to get the file ready to send, because that takes a few minutes, right? And you might pass the deadline otherwise, but also have a 5 or so minutes to really read through and check it all. And that's where I think you're going to have a lot more good fortune. You're going to start really knowing what to look for and how to prepare. And those are some techniques I've seen really help candidates in the past. So just to recap, make sure you're ready both biologically and mentally with everything you need to complete the test and really be in situ for 2 to 3 hours. You don't want to have any distractions flag up. Make sure your setup mirrors your work or whatever setup you're most used to modeling in. Make sure your laptop and PC type is all consistent. Make sure if you're used to using a physical mouse and keyboard, you're really using it. Make sure you are using a calculator if you're used to using that, and make sure you format it well and you price in time in the case to really check your work and make sure it's thorough. And remember, it's not bite off more than you can chew. As a general rule, a well-composed piece of modeling is just as valuable as something that's rushed but tries to do all of these different things at once. Another tip I recognized recently is when you are invited into the client's office to do the modeling test and you're maybe using a laptop you're not as familiar with, ask the client for the laptop password at the start. I've had candidates before try and do specific formulas and they've hit a key they've not recognized and it's locked the laptop. Okay. But then spend 10 crucial minutes going to reception trying to get the client downstairs to get the password. Just say at the start, hey, John, or hey, Mary, look, weird question, but this happened before. Can I just have the access key because I just don't want it to freeze during my model or during perhaps one of your few minute breaks as you kind of get back in the zone and that type of thing. So that's another thing I just wanted to really mention to you guys as pretty important. Any questions on this one, or should I go to the next slide? Cool, here we go. Um, this is just a final point. I don't think it's necessarily aimed at this group, but I also wanted this to be kind of client and employer friendly as well, because I know there can be a tension sometimes. I know that employers can feel like the more they teach and upskill their staff in modeling, the more they're likely to take those skills and go elsewhere, particularly when what they're upskilling them on isn't within the parameters of the day job they have. Because the worry is, okay, why are you really trying to learn promote structures? Like we never do that here. And I completely understand. And I must be honest, I think for the most part, the worry is quite legitimate. If you have an employee that's really batting on the houses to do CFA level one or do specific courses and stuff, it can mean they're trying to get better at their day-to-day work, but it can also telegraph they're looking for more. I would just encourage employers to really realize that yes, that may be a potential trade-off, but in the short to medium term, you want to give your employees opportunities to upskill, even when it's outside of the dimensions of their job with you. It will make them more hungry, it will make them more rewarded, it will make them realize that there's actually greater learning to be done at your firm. It could open them up to do other projects with you don't imagine they're good at right now, but if they're doing other things regularly, they can become much more investor facing with their analytical skills. And then suddenly there's a new dimension within the firm they can use. And I just think it can also, let's be honest, the most immediate way it can empower an employer is the quality of work being carried out by that employee. Even if the modeling you do is narrower, that's still going to be of a much higher quality now that they're thinking more acutely each day, doing lots of courses and getting better at the foundations of modeling. So this slide, a little bit erroneous compared to the other points here, but I also wanted to spotlight how if an employer is watching this, or you want to maybe the other way of putting this is if you're trying to talk to your employer about why to put you through a course and help you because they are expensive, you want to get like company funding, maybe expect a bit of like a, oh, why do you want to do that? Like that would be normal, and have some of these reasons in your arsenal in terms of why, because it might help you kind of get that funding and support from them. And I think it's important to touch on that too.